Hi, I'm Craig Taylor, and as always, a huge thank you for taking the time out of your day to press that play button and join me here in another video on my YouTube channel, the Bushcraft Padawan. You join me today out in the woods, and it's the woods that I referred to in a previous video, which I'll link to either up here or down here, in which I talk about being able and being fortunate enough to get permission to come out and wild camp and practice my skills on some private land, and that's where I am today. I'm actually going to be doing an overnighter this evening. It's my first overnighter of 2017. It's Friday the 17th of Feb, so I'll be staying overnight into Saturday the 18th of Feb. And what I thought would be a good idea, as much for my benefit I think more than anybody else's, is when I come out and do these overnighters or these multi-day camps, is to actually have a specific focus in mind, a specific target about what it is that I want to achieve over that period of time. One, to help my focus, but two, it would also help to structure these reflective videos that I'm putting together as part of a portfolio, I guess. So let's have a look at what those things are that I'm looking at getting out of this afternoon, this evening and tomorrow's trip. First thing that I'm looking to do is to identify a suitable location. One, a location for this evening's camp, but also hopefully the same place that I can start to build a more permanent bushcraft camp, with in mind the fact that when I come out in the future, if I can build that up to be a decent enough camp, when I use it in the future I can just come out, drop my gear down and start to develop some of the other skills that are often put to a secondary purpose, or put into less of a priority, because I'm building the camp, or I'm building a tripod, or I'm setting my tarp up or something like that. So somewhere permanent that I can just drop my gear in the future. That's one of the things that I'm looking at finding and locating during this trip. Whilst I'm doing that, what I'd love to get set up is a ridgepole. I'd like an idea of building a lean-to shelter, a natural lean-to shelter. So I want to get and establish a decent ridgepole and get that set up with the right quality material, facing in the right direction. I'd like to establish it and get that put into place over this overnight trip. I'd also like to get to grips more with using my ferro rod and birch bark to create a flame and get that going into the fire for the overnighter. I've had mixed success with birch bark. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. I don't really know why. I seem to be doing the same technique all of the time, so I'm not sure what it is, but I'd like to kind of hone that and practice that more whilst I'm out. And I'd also like to build a cooking tripod, so not only for the benefit of this evening's meal and tomorrow morning's meal, but also again in the future when I come out, that's already set up, that's already established. It's one more thing ticked off this base camp that I'm looking to build. So why don't you join me? Let's have a look for that location to begin with, and let's start ticking things off this list. I'm back again. So after probably only maybe 20-30 minutes of scouting round, I've found a decent-ish location. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. For me, the one thing that it's lacking is a reliable running water source. Now, I kind of knew that when I asked permission to camp on this land, but you can't have everything, can you? Looks like I'll have to man pack in a lot of water, or I'll have to sort of take my chances in some of the fishing lakes and ponds that are around here. So it's not perfect by any stretch, but let me just give you a quick orientation about what I'm thinking with this camp setup. Let me just jump to that side of the camera. So where you can see my bergen on the floor here, I anticipate that will roughly be where I'm going to be looking at putting my bed, setting the bed up. And then over here on the right hand side of the picture, this tree here will be the supporting tree for one side of my ridgepole, and this tree over on the left hand side will be the supporting tree for my other side of the ridgepole. So that's the plan at the moment. That ridgepole will span between the two trees, and that general area where my bergen is dumped on the ground, that'll be the sleeping area. So I think I'd best pull my finger out and start to look for a decent, substantial, load-bearing ridgepole. So what I've done here is I've identified 2 trees that are going to be the peripheral points, if you like, of my shelter. I've selected a ridgepole and I've tied it using a Canadian hitch, or 2 Canadian hitches at this end and 2 Canadian hitches at that end, forming a cross to support the weight of the shelter across this ridgepole. I just wanted to outline where I see a number of people on YouTube making some mistakes with these ridgepoles, or I think they're making mistakes. Now, I'm by no means an expert, I've said this before, but I have read Mors Kahansky's Bushcraft, and the Sheltercraft page gives quite an obvious insight into how this ridgepole should actually be positioned on the supporting trees, and it's somewhere where I see a number of people going wrong. If we look at this ridgepole now, let's assume that my arms and my body are going to be the branches that form the shelter part of my shelter, and I'm pushing now into this ridgepole. I am now one of the branches or one of the pieces of foliage pushing against this. The weight of me is pushing this ridgepole into the tree, into the supporting tree. So in essence, the tree is taking a lot of the weight, and so are the Canadian hitches, or the jam knots, should I say, that I tied here. Where I see a number of people tying ridgepoles is they put them on the other side of the tree, this side. So you can now imagine if my weight was being pressed. There we go. In this direction, you can now see that actually the weight of the shelter is going to be pushing this ridgepole away from the supporting tree. The tree is almost serving no purpose at all, and all that's holding that ridgepole in place or aloft are these knots that I've tied, as opposed to how I've tied it, whereby yes, the hitches, the knots are taking some weight, but actually a lot of the force, a lot of the pressure of the shelter is actually being taken by the supporting trees at either end. Like I say, I'm not an expert, I'm not meant to be sort of thumbing my nose at anybody that's done it that way, but it did seem quite an obvious engineering aspect of building a shelter, and it's something that Mo's done a very good job of illustrating in his book, if you've not already read it. I'm just clearing the area underneath the shelter at the moment of any debris, of any moss, leaves, twigs, branches, anything like that. Where I'm standing here towards the camera, the area that's actually sheltered, this will be the area where the poles slant down from and where my bed and sleeping bag and everything else will eventually be. So the area I'm kind of walking around now, this is the area that I'll be clearing out for now because it's my priority. Everything this side, everything that side of the ridgepole behind me, that's going to be the area where my campfire is. That's going to be the area where I'm going to do my cooking and eating and things like that. So whilst it will probably need clearing in time, it's not my priority at the moment. I'm going to get this side cleared so I can get a decent night's sleep. That might be a job for another day. Another great point that Moores makes in his book when constructing the ridgepole and thinking about the orientation of your shelter is to try and have this ridgepole parallel with the prevailing wind conditions. Now, I've checked what the prevailing wind conditions are for this area, and I was right. I suspected it was southwesterly, and it is approximately a southwesterly prevailing wind condition or wind direction in this area of the country that I'm in. So what I did was I took out my trusty compass. I figured out that pretty much that direction was north, and therefore that direction there was pretty much southwest. And as you can see, if you look at the direction of my arm and the direction of the pole, it's as near as damn parallel to the prevailing wind conditions. Now, I could have hunted around for a lot longer trying to find 2 trees that were directly in line and in a southwesterly direction, but this is pretty much spot on. This is pretty damn close. So I'm quite happy with this for the amount of time it took me to find this area. The rationale for this is if you have your ridgepole, or if you have the opening to your shelter facing the wind, it will blow smoke into the shelter. If you have it with the back to the wind, which to be honest would have been my logical assumption, the way that the wind circulates round can just end up scooping the smoke back in to your shelter. It can just whip it back round. Having it run parallel with your shelter means that most of the time the wind is going to be coming across the front of your shelter, and it's going to be taking the smoke away rather than blowing it in or recirculating it into your shelter. That's the theory. Let's see what happens this evening if the wind picks up. But that's the rationale, and it seems perfectly logical for trying to erect your shelter ridgepole parallel with the prevailing wind conditions. So how's the afternoon been going? Quite well, I think. I've set myself a task of getting a ridgepole up for a shelter in the future, and I've done that, and you can start to see that I've started to put on or lean against there some dead standing pieces of wood that I've been finding, so you get an idea about how that natural shelter lean-to will form. I have found myself a decent location. It's not perfect by any stretch, but it's better than not having a location to go to, so I'm happy with what I've got. And I've also put together the tripod that I mentioned. It's not perfect by any stretch. I'm going to need to relash this when I come back again, because I ran out of cord, and my natural selection of materials for cordage is nowhere near what it should be. So I had a scrap of paracord left, and I used that. It's good enough for this evening. And I've also got my fire prepared. Let's just see how I get on with that final task that I set myself of being able to go from using a ferro rod and birch bark to actually being able to get a sustainable fire going. Fingers crossed for later on today. Okay, so it's now 16:30 hours in the afternoon. The sun, as you'd expect, in the middle of February, is dropping quite quickly over my right shoulder. So I thought it best to plan ahead for when I lose the light completely. I've dug out my tarp from my rucksack, and I've placed it behind me, as you can see, using the ridgepole as a way of supporting it, allowing me to get quite a lot of length and depth using the tarp itself. This should start to give you an idea, hopefully, about how it will look when it's complete. Instead of that plasticky tarp material behind me, what that will actually be is a series of dead standing wood placed next to one another, and you can see just here where I've started to do that, that will span the full length, or almost the full length, of the ridgepole, and then on top of that I'll pile smaller twigs, smaller branches, I'll plant moss, I'll put some leaf debris on top, so that I've got a nice thick insulated wall instead of that plastic tarp behind me. I've also prepared some firewood for the evening, and I've got a decent pile, probably just out of camera shot, over there to turn to should I get through all of this. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to start to break out my sleeping kit, get that all laid out so that when it does get dark I'm not searching around for it, and it'll also give time for my sleeping bag to loft up. Although it's a synthetic material, it'll just give it some time to fluff up and to warm up in my bivvy bag. So next stop, I'll probably see you around the campfire. So, that time of the day when the stomach calls, I've just rustled up some chicken and bacon in pasta sauce. I fried up a couple of mushrooms and sliced those and put those in. There you go, quite literally a dog's dinner. And I'm just boiling up at the moment. You can see the black metal mug there, just boiling up in there, an army issue chocolate pudding in chocolate sauce, quite possibly the only part of the army issue ration pack that was edible in my time. So yeah, so a 2-course dinner for this evening, and all cooked in the fresh air, al fresco. Morning. So here we are, the morning after the night before, and it was a very mild night the night before as well. I was as snug as a bug in a rug. Before I came out here, I was umming and ahhing about which sleeping bag to bring. Do I bring my synthetic bag? Do I bring my down bag? I took a look at the weather forecast, and it was forecast to be mild, and indeed it was. I was as snug as a bug in a rug inside my synthetic bag, so I'm glad I went for that choice. I think the down bag would have been too warm and would have probably led to a spoilt night's sleep, a very hot night's sleep. It's 8:05 in the morning right now. I've been awake for about an hour. I've just had a cup of instant porridge and a cup of tea. I always have a quick breakfast to give time for the heat of the fire to die down so that I could You know, I could leave the area knowing that the fire was dead and that I could douse it with water and distribute any ashes and things like that. So I got up and had breakfast straight away, which is why I didn't faff around setting the camera up or anything like that. So for those of you wondering how I got on with my ferro rod and the birch bark, it didn't go well. It didn't go well at all. I think I've discovered the problem. It's not the ferro rod technique. I don't think it's the fact that I'm not using birch bark or that I'm not using dry birch bark. I think it's down to the fact that I'm just not scraping the powder into a big enough pile. It caught a couple of times yesterday and went into flame, but it just wasn't around long enough for me to feed that flame. So I think, you know, I think it's a case of trial and error, and I think I'm ironing out problems as I go along, but I think it is very much down to I'm just not spending long enough scraping that birch bark surface into a big enough pile of dust for the spark to catch, and for it to give some time for the flame to build up for me to build on top of it. So something for me to work on. I've enjoyed this overnight. It's brushed a few cobwebs away. It's allowed me to try a few new things with my gear. I've ticked off most of the things that were on my list, including, I guess you could say, the birch bark and ferro rod. At least I've given that a go, and I've thought of another variable that I can change. So all in all, I think it's been a very successful first overnighter of 2017. But what about you? Did you enjoy the video? Was there something in this video, even if it was something as simple as the orientation of the shelter, or something as simple as to where to put the crossbeam or the ridgepole of the shelter, was that useful to you? If there was something in here that you found useful or that sparked some ideas for yourself, do please click that thumbs up button. Do please like this video. If you think that perhaps there's something in here that members of your network would find useful, then do please share it with them using that share button. And if you're not already a subscriber and you'd like to be kept abreast of further developments in my bushcraft activities, then do please click that subscribe button to make sure that you don't miss out on any future videos. As always, like I said at the beginning of the video, thank you ever so much for taking the time to press that play button and take that time out of your day to catch up with what I've been getting on with out in the woods. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.